question, raise your hand. I'll try and get over with a microphone that he can hear you.
You took my thunder. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Logan Campbell. I'm the founder and CEO of Aerotas. We've been around since 2014 helping land surveyors use drone technology. Can everyone hear me all right? Am I not too loud with everything? All right, I think we're okay. So what I was here to kind of cover today and what we're going to talk about is how to get survey-grade data with a drone. So I want to talk about that for a second too. Like, what do we actually mean by survey-grade data? By quick show of hands, how many of you have actually flown a drone or had someone in your company fly a drone for work? Great, I'd say probably half of you. And how many of you are using it to actually get topographic data and actual kind of planimetric data on your final surveys on a regular basis? Okay, we got a handful of you, but definitely a heck of a lot less. So that's what we're actually talking about getting to here today, is not just like, hey, look, I can fly a drone and take pretty pictures, but how do you actually get a complete workflow that gets you from flying a drone to a complete final sealed survey? And to get there, there's a whole bunch of different steps, a whole workflow that I'm going to go over, from what hardware you're using, how you do mission planning, setting your ground control and checkpoints, your operations procedures, your office workflow, all the software that you use to actually get there. So that's what I'm here to do. And as I mentioned, if you do have any questions, just raise your hand in the middle of the presentation. I'll walk over and hopefully try and help you out with that. So a little bit more about who we are. Aerotas was founded in 2014 to help surveyors use drones. There are a lot of drone companies out there that really try and replace surveyors. We've had a very different approach. Our job is to actually enable surveyors, both from the legal perspective, we know how important it is to actually protect what you guys do, but also from the expertise perspective. The drone, as we view it, is another tool in the toolbox. It's not going to be the right tool for absolutely every project. It's certainly not going to replace a total station or a high-precision GPS unit, but it can make your workflow a heck of a lot more efficient. Part of the reason we know that is we've done just shy of about 3,000 surveys over the entire country now, working for land surveyors all across the country. So why do you care? What's the actual point of bringing in drone survey? Well, the biggest thing is actually man-hour savings on projects. The way that we view it, a drone doesn't really enable you to do something that you've never been able to do before. It's to get you to the same deliverable, the same things that you give to your clients, but faster, better, and cheaper, right? So man-hour savings, fewer missed shots by having a complete record of the site that's in front of you, so that you don't ever have to go back into the field if you did miss a shot or something. Fewer disputes, you have actual photographic evidence of the entire status of the site, the way that it was when you guys visited it. Happier CAD techs and engineers, you get richer data, and just more valuable deliverables. So when I talk about getting survey-grade data by drone, what do we actually want that to look like? This is what you guys care about, right? A final, completed, accurate, sealed survey. You don't want a 15 gigabyte point cloud. You don't want 1,000 photos that then you have a mess and you have to give to someone and say, hey, let's see if you can figure it out. You want this, you want a survey that you can print, that you can deliver. And that's what I want to show you how to get. And to get there, there are quite a few different actually steps in this entire workflow. First part of the step is actually going to be planning the project. So that encompasses, all right, we know we need a survey on this site, but what do we actually need? Are we getting 1-foot topo, 5-foot topo? Are we doing an ALPA survey? So actually planning that, setting up your mission planning, all that good stuff. What your flight plan is going to be, what your flight altitude is, we'll dive into all those details enough. Setting ground control points and GCP targets. Those are going to be your tie-in points that actually tie in the photos of the drone itself and tie them into the 3D model. As well as checkpoints there too. That's how we're going to verify accuracy and make sure that that the survey is actually accurate. That's right. I mean, if the survey isn't accurate, it's not worth much more than just a pretty picture. So you got to make sure that it's accurate with that ground control and checkpoint stuff. Then going out in the field, collecting data. That's just, I mean, heck, for anyone that's flown a drone, that is far and away the easiest and most boring part of the entire process. You push a button, drone goes up. That's about just 15, 20 minutes. If it's a big site, maybe it's 40 minutes. You're standing in the field staring at a drone. It's amazing to me how a couple of years ago, that was the exciting part. Everyone says, ooh, look, it's a drone, it's flying, it's incredible. But now it's the boring part, which is really what we like to see in this technology too. It's become less of a kind of shiny object and more of just a tool. That you want this to get data, you push the button, it gathers data, and it does in 20 minutes of you standing and staring and watching it go back and forth. It'll do that for 20 minutes, and it does what would have taken maybe a whole day to do. So once you do that, great. You have maybe 1,000 photos, maybe more, and a couple of shots on the ground. Now what? Now there's still more to do in the office. So there's the actual photogrammetry part. Photogrammetry, as most of you probably know, is the science of taking a bunch of 2D images and converting it into a precise 3D model. We'll go over that, some of the softwares that we use as well. Once you do that, you wind up with this rich 3D model. Big old point cloud, orthophoto, DEM, many gigabytes of outputs that are an enormous pain to deal with, and they are not yet that. And this is one of the points where a lot of people stumble to, so that you need to draft your line work. You actually need to extract what you really need. Clean topo data. You don't need topographic lines around every single bush or car or person or tree or debris pile. So you actually need to draft your surface, extract your line work, and then get it in CAD. Finish it in whatever CAD suite you use to get that final survey. So that's the whole workflow in a nutshell. And the reason we like to go over this in just a little bit of detail at the beginning is because every single step of that workflow matters. Every single one of those steps has a couple of different potential pitfalls. One, you could either do something that reduces your accuracy, or two, you could just kill yourself on the amount of time that you're using there. A good workflow actually saves you time and money. That's why we're here. That's why we exist as a company, is to actually save you guys time and money on this sort of thing, so that flying a drone does not turn into a 40-hour project. It actually turns into just a couple of hours, and now you're actually making money. So overall, there's the field data collection side of this workflow. That's planning your project, setting your targets, actually flying the drone, and then the office data processing side. So we'll go over a little bit of both of those. So the first step in all of this, though, is actually going to be picking your hardware. I know by your show of hands earlier that most of you guys already probably have some form of drone hardware out there. And there are a ton of different options. There's going to be, fixed wings and multi-rotors. There's metric cameras, standard cameras, all kinds of different stuff. But what we like to say is a really good idea is to buy based on what matters, not what's exciting. Remember I talked about earlier how drones used to be the cool part? Like, look, it's flying. How fun is that? But now they're really boring, and that's a good thing. Because people that go out and buy the most exciting, flashy, fancy drone often think that it'll be the best tool for the job. We actually had someone come to us that spent almost $100,000 on the absolute highest end drone that they thought money could buy. And they're like, great, we want to get great surveys out of it. We need 300th accuracy. It's going to be incredible. And they showed us the drone, and we're like, that's a Hollywood drone. It's like a filmmaker's drone. You're not going to do anything with that. Like, no, we spent $100,000. This guy told me this thing's the best. It's awesome. And, well, yeah, you're like filming a movie. This is terrible for surveying. So we always try and warn people, buy based on what matters, not what's exciting. So like accuracy, that's really important. How much ground can you cover per acre at the accuracy that you need? That's what you should be asking yourself with a lot of these drone survey systems. Reliability, simplicity. Do you want something that has a million different moving parts so that there's a 50-50 chance that when you get out in the field it'll actually work, or it'll give you some obscure error, and maybe a plug or connection got wiggled loose somewhere, or maybe some obscure, one-of-one different part that you bought that triggers the camera when you're flying, that didn't work properly, so you just spent an hour in the field and have nothing to show for it? No, reliability should be really, really important with hardware as well. And then, of course, price, too. When we view the drone as a tool, that means price actually is important. You want to make money off of this. If you are spending $100,000 north on a drone, your ROI is going to be a lot harder to prove out. And realistically, those are going to be more of science experiments than actual business tools. And we think that a drone program ought to be a business tool. It ought to be something that you can deploy in the field. Everyone should have in their truck, just a simple drone that can go out, fly, and get this survey-grade data. So let's actually dive into this. Let's talk about some of the different hardware options that are out there, some of the different choices. So first up is a drone-specific camera. This one right there is from the DJI Phantom 4. You're probably familiar with it. DJI Phantom series is the most produced aircraft of all time at this point. And that camera on there is really good. It's a 20 megapixel camera. I said $10,000 all in. That's with all of your various accessories, assuming probably one of the RTK units as well, which I'll talk about in a second too, that just came out. But yeah, about a 20 megapixel camera. Typically one of the lowest end surveying grade ones, or what we say survey grade, that you can get survey grade data out of. Next up are systems that can carry better cameras, kind of large independent cameras like a Sony A7R. Those, if you're familiar, might be put on a DJI M600, something like that. A little bit better camera, a lot more complicated. Realistically, if you actually get your workflow, your operations, and all the rest of that process right, you can actually get about the same accuracy. There's not that much of an accuracy bump going from a 20 megapixel camera up to a 30 or 40 megapixel camera. And I'll actually put in another just kind of point there. Part of the reason there is not that big of a difference between like a 20 megapixel Phantom camera and a 40 megapixel independent camera is because the biggest sources of error don't come from the camera itself. It comes from everything else. Vibration, noise, imperfections in the camera lens, ground control point setting, changes in altitude, changes in terrain and topography that actually impact all of the 3D processing. Like error doesn't really come from the camera that much. The camera is really, once you get everything else right, the camera's not that huge of a part of it. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is airborne LiDAR. This is a technology that is really exciting, honestly. It has an enormous amount of potential out there. But the biggest downside is it's very, very expensive. An airborne LiDAR rig right now, if you're looking at an unmanned aircraft LiDAR, realistically you're starting at about $170,000 all in. And it'll get you pretty good data, about 2 to 3/10 accuracy, so honestly not even as good as photogrammetry right now. So just kind of to talk a little bit more on LiDAR and why we think that that's going to take a little bit longer. The ground cover penetration isn't actually that great. It's good, the accuracy is not quite as good, and it's really expensive. Our professional opinion is that it's probably about 3 to 5 years out from actually being viable from a business standpoint. We're looking at, there are a lot of new technologies on the horizon called solid state LiDAR is one of them. That'll make it, like all technology is, lighter, faster, better, cheaper, everything you want. So we're keeping an eye on it because the technology has just insane potential to really do a lot of good. But it's just not quite there yet from an ROI perspective. So that's LiDAR, that's photogrammetry. Next up is what you actually put it on. What kind of drone aircraft system are we actually using? Broadly speaking, there are 3 major categories here. I kind of left off on the far left-hand side here is going to be your kind of toy drones that you buy for $50 from Walmart and cool, but you're not going to survey them with them. And on the other side over there is going to be your, couple $1 million military drone rigs that are going to be great, but totally illegal to fly, be on line of sight, all sorts of FAA regulations will just keep you from flying. So here are kind of the 3 major categories that you can actually fly legally and actually get survey grade data from. So, starting with the small multi-rotor. This is, again, far and away the most popular. The DJI Phantom 4 Pro Unique is another, is an Intel portfolio company that makes a similar product. 1.5 feet diameter, usually about $10,000 all in. You can actually go a heck of a lot cheaper too if you want to start with just just the aircraft itself. For a non-RTK version will be about $1,500 or so. But realistically, you're looking at about $10,000 all in. That's one of the ways that we like to talk about it too, is what your all-in price is. It's really, really easy to think that the drone is the only thing you need, and then forget about all of your battery batteries, your cases, your accessories, your tablets, your software, your blah, 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 it goes on and on. So what's your kind of all-in price going to be with that? So yeah, about 10 grand for something that starts with the Phantom 4 Pro. And then your large multi-rotor, your M200, M600 series micro drones make some as well. Those are typically going to be considerably heavier, considerably more complex, but can carry a heavier, more advanced sensor payload. Those things can carry your LiDAR sensors or your custom, your third-party independent cameras or something like that. Those are looking at about $20,000 to $30,000 all in. Again, that's everything, batteries, cameras, whatnot. And from our experience, get really about comparable accuracy to the Phantoms when those off-score flows are used correctly. And next up are your kind of fixed-wing aircraft. The SenseFly EV is the most popular one. Trimble makes one called the UX5. Aerotas has another popular one. These things are a little different because obviously they fly like an airplane, and those have some advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are it's a really efficient method of flight, an efficient method of aerodynamics, and it can stay in the air for about an hour, which means it can cover a heck of a lot more ground. Your other drones, big or small, you're looking at about, real-world scenarios, about 20 minutes of flight time. These can stay up for an hour. They can cover, at 500, sometimes 1,000 acres in a single flight that'll take an hour. Downsides are from them, they take off and land like an aircraft, which when they're small, best case scenario, it's kind of controlled crash landing. That's okay, they're lightweight. The other downside is because they're airplane style, they have to fly high and fast. Drones, the multi-rotors can actually fly low and slow. So the fixed wings are great if you are covering huge, huge, huge areas, hundreds and hundreds of acres, and all you really need is total data. Because you're really not going to get that much more than about, I'd say maybe 2 to 3 tenths accuracy or so. And that's just because it has to fly high and fast, whereas if you're flying any of the multi-rotors, you can fly at 100 feet altitude and get a heck of a lot better accuracy on smaller sites. But the fixed wings do make sense, if, like I said, if you're covering hundreds of acres and all you need is topo. Other downside to them is, of course, that they're kind of expensive too. You're looking at the $20,000 to $30,000 all-in price for something along those lines. I'll pause for a second and see if there are any questions here, because usually we get a lot of questions on kind of the different types of hardware and that sort of stuff. Yeah?
Have you worked with the Parrot Sanofi drone at all?
The Parrot Sanofi drone, I'm trying to remember that one. Yes, we've worked with it a little bit. That is going to be in roughly a similar class as kind of the small multi-rotor. The one thing I'm not familiar with is the software autopilot beyond that. Typically, kind of with hardware, there's a whole ecosystem around it too, right? Phantoms are popular partly because there's such a massive ecosystem around the entire drone, the software that's required to fly it, and that sort of thing. The Parrot is totally sufficient. Honestly, any camera that you can get in the air, you can do some level of surveying with, but that would fall into kind of the far left category there.
You got the accuracy. You got the accuracy at around a tenth. Are you talking horizontal and vertical accuracy that you can get, depending on how you set these projects up?
Yeah, horizontal and vertical accuracy. Okay. And I'll take that as an opportunity as well to just dive in. What do we mean by accuracy? I could probably ask everyone in the room, and we'll get at least a handful of different definitions for what is accuracy. How do you measure accuracy? A lot of people use National Map Accuracy Standards, kind of older standard for actual topographic accuracy. Some people use maybe a 95% confidence interval, that 95% of the check shots we expect to be within a certain range. What we like to use is something called the ASPRS Positional Accuracy Standards. I'll talk about those a little bit more in the data processing part of this. But it's a statistical measure of accuracy that actually takes all of the points, puts them on a normal distribution, and says we expect a certain percent to be within this confidence interval. So when we say a tenth, it's technically, it would mean squared error. But as far as horizontal and vertical, yes, that's actually horizontal and vertical. Now, that's up to a tenth, right? Not every single project can be exactly a tenth. That's a tenth when you're flying at a somewhat lower altitude, and typically on hardscape, or dirt, or asphalt, or concrete, something like that. Then you can get better than a tenth accuracy, both horizontal and vertical. If you're looking at grasslands, yeah, you're going to be hard pressed to get a tenth in any situation, especially because there's just a lot software, you'll be able to do topo. If 1 foot contours are all you need, then really, usually 3/10 of a foot accuracy is typically sufficient, again, by the definition of accuracy that we use, so. Does that answer your question? I know, a little long.
Maybe if we get to like the workflow and how you set that up to get that kind of accuracy later on.
Cool, sounds good. So the last thing I want to talk about is technology that's really taken off more in the last couple of months, which is RTK. So RTK and non-RTK drones. The original Phantom series was all non-RTK, just single band consumer grade GPS, plus or minus 10 feet or something like that, with really being terrible. And the only way to get any sort of accuracy or precision on that was to use a good number of ground control points and checkpoints. And that was actually a really good workflow, because the drone was a heck of a lot cheaper. You guys are all surveyors, you all have the equipment that you need to actually set ground control points, checkpoints, and high precision points on the ground. So, I mean, honestly, it's very affordable. It's a simple, highly reliable workflow. You fly the drone, take pictures, integrate your check shots, boom, you got a survey, you got it all done. The only downside now that RTK is out there, it's a little bit lower accuracy than RTK, and more field time because you've got to set a lot more ground control points. So now there's airborne RTK. I'll also talk about the difference between RTK and PPK. RTK has a dual band antenna on the aircraft itself so that you can actually calculate the aircraft's position to within about 1/10 of a foot to get everything set up right. Very high accuracy, and the real benefit of that is you don't have to set very many ground control points or checkpoints at all, which leads to less field time all around. The downsides, it's a lot more expensive. RTK aircraft typically start at around $8,000 and go up from there. And it is a more complex, error-prone workflow. That's part of why we, at least, our preferred workflow with all of it is to actually do PPK processing, so post-process all of the GPS data. Same accuracy, same benefits of RTK, but a more reliable workflow because it's not relying on radio links, it's not relying on cell tower connections. It's a slightly simpler workflow in some ways, but it's still expensive to have the aircraft and hardware itself, and it does take office time to do that PPK workflow. RTK and PPK technology is something that 3 years ago we talked about airborne RTK the same way that I talk about LiDAR today. We used to say it has great potential, and it's not quite there yet. It's really expensive, it's really complicated, but actually it's there now. And only in the last couple of months have the technologies and supporting softwares come out that can let you get this and get it reliably. One of the big problems with airborne RTK, what it used to be, is that an airborne RTK system could tell you exactly where the antenna on the drone was. But that's not what you care about. What you care about is where the center of the camera was when the photo was taken. And even though that's only a distance of, maybe half a foot, that's an enormously complicated workflow that would cause all kinds of problems. But that has kind of finally been solved, especially with the new DJI Phantom 4 RTK. I promise I don't work for DJI, but they're kind of a market leader in a lot of these drones. So overall, what our recommended, preferred hardware setup, if you're in the market for a new drone right now, what you'll hear from us, our recommendation is the DJI Phantom 4 RTK drone, plus all of the accessories and stuff that you need. So that means your rugged cases, because this is going to be a piece of field equipment that's just going to get beaten up like crazy, and if it can't get beaten up like crazy and survive, then you don't want it. All of your extra batteries, checklists, spare memory cards, parts, propellers, software, blah, blah, blah. But at least as far as airframe goes, this is definitely our recommendation right now. Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about explaining a little more about RTK and PPK. They're acronyms. They stand for real-time kinematic and post-processing kinematic. But what the basic technology is taking raw GPS satellite observations from multiple different wavelengths from the satellite, and then processing it using a sort of wavelength differential to actually get a much, much, much more precise fix on the location of the drone than you would otherwise. So you actually have to compare that against a base station somewhere, and once you actually post-process those, you can get a much higher precision lock on where the aircraft was than you could before. Without RTK PPK, GPS on the drone is about as good as the blue dot on your phone when you open up the maps. Most of the time it's pretty good, within a couple of feet. Sometimes you might be on the other side of the street, which, I mean, heck, it's an incredible technology, but just not serving you great. This RTK PPK raw satellite data can get you a heck of a lot more than that. Get your accuracy down to about a 10 or better sometimes.
You're talking PPK,
the question was about software to send the maps. I'll cover that a little bit more once we get into the data processing workflow. So yeah, overall, this is our recommended hardware setup right now. If you have some older hardware, it's almost for sure going to work, but this is kind of the latest and greatest as that band for RTK. So the next step that I wanted to talk about was to dive into the mission planning process. So now we've got our hardware. We'll just pretend for the sake we're using one of the Phantom series drones, doesn't matter too much. We need to actually plan our mission. So when we talk about the mission planning process, that actually encompasses a couple of things. One is setting up your actual flight plan itself, managing things like overlap, elevation, blah, blah, blah. Also planning where you're going to put all of your ground control points. Where you're going to put your ground control points, where you're going to put your checkpoints, how many do you set, what do you do there. And also selecting your flight altitude as well. For anyone that's flown a drone, they know that flight altitude makes a pretty big difference. Whether you fly at 100 feet or 400 feet. That's going to change everything from field time to the amount of photos that you take, to the accuracy, number of ground control points you have to set. It's all kind of intertwined there. So for mission planning, the first thing is what you do kind of in the field for setting ground control targets, with the goal being fewer field work man hours, right? To go back to what I said at the beginning, we have a big goal here of saving time and money. I could really, really easily put together a workflow for you guys that would kill you in the field. You would be spending 3 days doing field work and then 3 days of post-processing for what you could have just hand topoed in a day. That is not the goal. The goal is to save you time in the field. If your drone is not saving you time, it is not doing its job. So setting ground control targets. Actually, we'll talk more ground control targets in a second. So setting your ground control points, a rule of thumb that we have is you want to set, if you don't have RTK or PPK, you want to set about 5 ground control points per 300 photos or so. It's a very rough rule of thumb, but it's one that we found to be the most accurate way to do this. If you set fewer than that, there's a good chance that you'll have too many photos between ground control points and it's going to cause some error. The next thing to think about is your actual drone flight time as well. The higher you fly, the less time in the field it takes. A common misconception that we get with field work and flying a drone is that lower is always better, right? Lower, it's going to be closer to the ground, the pictures are going to have better resolution, it's going to look nice, and we're going to get better accuracy. It's always better to fly lower. And that's really not the case for a couple of reasons. One is that when you fly lower, it takes a heck of a lot more field time. The difference between 100 feet and 400 feet is probably maybe 10x the flight time, 10x the batteries that you would need as well, something like that. Second, you need to set a lot more ground control points. We talked about that kind of 5 per 300 photos. It's taking so many more photos, you actually need to set more ground control points the lower you fly. And that is, sorry. Yeah, you need to set more ground control points the lower you fly, so typically higher is going to be better in that scenario as well. So really, you want to fly as high as you can to get the accuracy that you really need. Our rule of thumb with the Phantom at least, and this is different for every drone that you use, is if you fly around 400 feet, you're looking at about 2 to 3 tenths accuracy or something like that when everything else is done pretty well. That's going to be plenty sufficient for your 1-foot contours, things like that. You go all the way down to 100 feet, That's where you get your kind of 1/10 of a foot accuracy that's going to be good on hardscape projects, ALTA sites, things like that, where you really need a 1/10 or better accuracy. Another thing when you're thinking about mission planning in the field is what supplemental topo and what other supplemental shots you're going to need to take. The drone is great, but as we talked about, it is a single tool in the toolbox. It doesn't do everything. Most notably, it does not have X-ray vision. It cannot see through trees, it cannot see through building eaves, and if there is anything that is, covered by brush or obstructions, it's not going to be able to see that as well. Not to mention, there are also a handful of different points that are legally required to be shot on the ground. Typically property corners and sometimes building corners, depending on what the survey is that you're doing, need to legally be shot on the ground and can't be done by an aerial survey. So it's worth being aware of those. One of the examples that I really like that I like talking about is if you have an ALTA survey and you've got a parking lot in there, and let's say it has 500 parking stalls or so, you've got to shoot every single parking stripe, every single paint stripe, but you also have to shoot every building corner. Does a paint stripe deserve the same level of attention and detail and accuracy as that building corner does? No. But you're spending just as much time on every one of those 500 paint stripes, just walking down, shooting everything, as you are on those building corners. Wouldn't it be easier to put up the drone and take all of those paint stripes in a 15-minute flight, and then shoot the building corners on the ground? So that's kind of what we mean by getting data on the field, this mixed workflow to actually get all of the data that you need. And the whole point of getting all this is really to avoid revisits too. You get your field workflow down right, you can avoid revisits. And the next part about good mission planning, the next part of why it matters, is because it will lead to fewer data processing man-hours. We talked about how you fly lower, you take more photos, you fly higher, you take fewer photos, but that changes your processing time too. Anyone that's dealt with photogrammetry knows that if you try and throw 5,000 photos at it, it's going to be days. Doesn't matter if you have a $20,000 supercomputer, it'll be days to actually process all of that. It's a pain. So planning your workflow from the beginning, planning your mission from the beginning to optimize the office side of the workflow as well, really helps you save that time in the office workflow as well. So the steps are obviously photogrammetry, and we always say, assume there will be errors to correct. We've done about 3,000 photogrammetry projects, and from talking to our data analysts, it's something like, I want to say only about 40% of them are just clean, perfect, and wonderful the first time we send them through. There are errors, and that's not even a bad thing. I mean, there are errors in that you see something's wrong, you fix it, you reprocess it, and then it's all good from there. But these little errors that can be caused just from camera calibration issues, the ground control point was marked wrong, you get the coordinate systems mismatched so that you're causing issues on that side, you didn't do grid to ground corrections properly, they're just little things that have to be fixed. It's very normal. So assume as part of your workflow that there are going to be errors to correct. Then drafting your line work, finishing in CAD, annotating, sealing, getting it out. Again, we'll dive more into that a little bit later. So let's actually dive into the nitty-gritty of some of this stuff. Some flight plan best practices. What do we recommend as some of the best practices for flying the drone and creating your mission plan? With keeping in mind everything I just said. We want to save time in the field, and we want to save time in the office. That's the goal. We want to get the data we need while saving time. The first thing that we recommend, and these are best practices, is the lawnmower flight path. That means just a single back and forth flight with about 75-75 overlap. That's 75% front overlap, where each photo shares 75% of it with the next photo. And 75% side as well. And also nadir-only photos with no obliques. Now, for people that have flown a lot of drones, they've probably seen a lot of other flight plans in addition to these. And maybe they're saying, I don't believe this. I like to fly 85-85. I like to fly a crosshatch flight pattern where it goes left and right, or east and west, and then flies again north and south. And I like to do it at a 15-degree angle. And you know what? That'll work too. And everyone that does the data processing in the office on that sort of thing is going to hate you for flying that flight pattern. They're going to take that data and they're going to just say, no, I'm going to send a crew back out and shoot it on the ground because that's miserable. This is what we recommend to optimize both field time and office time. Lawnmower flight pattern. If you're doing topo, if you're doing anything that doesn't have like extreme vertical relief like a downtown city center, you don't need to have that crosshatch flight pattern. That crosshatch flight pattern is so that you can often capture a better angle on the facades of buildings if you're doing 3D modeling for, heck, I don't know, like missile flight planning through a city or something. But for surveying, you don't need to capture the facades of buildings. So why are you spending all of this time and effort to get a little bit, to get just a little bit better view on the building facades? Same thing with 75-75. For 99% of projects, 75-75 is going to be more than enough data. There are a few exceptions for areas with high vegetation, like a lot of trees and vegetation. A little bit more overlap actually can help, up to 80, maybe 82% or something like that. But typically that's going to be overkill. And same thing with nadir only versus oblique images. Obliques, because of the way that it tilts the camera, will actually wind up getting a little bit lower quality data on the outer edge of that and creating a ton more photos and a ton more processing time, which, as I said before, creates more time in the field, more time in the office, and if you aren't saving time, then your drone's not doing its job. So that's why we kind of have these recommendations. This, from our tons of experience, this is the way to get the good data, the best data, the first time, the least amount of time in the field, and the least amount of time that it takes processing in the office. Questions on flight planning?
Would you say the obliques give you the same result as the crosshatch as far as vertical surfaces?
Yeah, that's typically the case. We've done a handful of accuracy studies the question was, do obliques give you the same sort of results as the crosshatch flight pattern? And the answer is yeah, it's about the same thing. It doesn't give you any noticeable bump in accuracy, and we've done measurements after the fact. We've done actually, independent field surveys that verify the accuracy. And flying it with obliques just doesn't have a noticeable impact at all. It does have a noticeable impact in the amount of time that it takes to process and the amount of time that it takes in the field to fly, but the actual end result accuracy is no better. Anything else?
You were saying that higher is going to give you more accuracy. You said when you fly 400, you expect 2 accuracy when you fly 100.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, it does. And the answer is that, so the question was about flying higher versus flying lower. Basically choosing your flight altitude relative to accuracy. And on the one hand, if I was saying if you fly higher, it's often better, and if you fly lower, then it's often better there, so what do you actually do? And there is a little bit of kind of conflicting forces there. Because higher saves you a lot more time in the field and a lot of time in the office and fewer ground control points. Lower flight altitudes will get you better accuracy, but with a big, massive asterisk caveat there. That caveat of flying lower to get better accuracy means that you need to set enough ground control points, and you need to set more ground control points than you would otherwise. If you don't have enough ground control points on a low altitude flight, you will get worse accuracy than a high altitude flight with enough ground control points. So there's a little bit of tension there. And again, it goes back to trying to get your office crew to not hate you. Who knows, maybe they already do, I don't know your office. But for an example, we had a client doing 100 acres of topo on just raw land. It had already been graded. It's just 100 acres of kind of dirt with plenty of topography, maybe 50-foot elevation change over the whole thing. And he said, I really want the accuracy to be good on this. So he flew it at 120 feet altitude. It took, I believe, 3,000 photos, took a couple of days to process, and he only set 20 ground control points. And we said 20 ground control points over 3,000 photos, that's not nearly enough. When you get in between ground control points, you get this kind of wiggle room that there's the 2 ground control points where you process the project are great, but then there's so many photos in between all of those that it kind of creates this wiggliness that he wound up probably, we guessed, would probably have right around foot accuracy because he flew so low. So we said, go out in the field, fly it again at 400. It's raw land, you just need topo. 400 is fine. So selecting your flight altitude is actually, it's an important part of mission planning to make sure that it does get the accuracy you need, but doesn't spend all that extra time. And really, the best way to pick accuracy is pick it relative, or to pick altitude, I should say, is to pick it relative to the mission that you're actually doing. If you need topo only, fly higher. If you need super, super high accuracy hardscape, and you are doing curve corners, and you need every single one of those curves. If you're doing ADA ramps, well, ADA ramps maybe you should survey it on the ground, but drones are pretty close to getting those accurate enough. But that's when you fly low. 100 acres of dirt, 400 feet. 1 acre gas station ALTA survey, 100 feet, 150 feet. So picking altitude and an altitude that's right for the mission will make sure that you kind of save time, save money, get the accuracy that you need. Does that kind of answer your question? Great. No, I'll go over ground control in a second. The yellow dots are just the perimeter points on that. So we kind of talked about this. There is such a thing as too much data. More data is not always better. Full stop. A lot of people say, oh, it's a world of big data. Processing's free. Time is free. Everything's free, right? That's not true. If you have to take 5 days to process it, then more data is not better. More data takes more time in the field, longer processing times, larger, more cumbersome files. Anyone that's ever tried to put a 15 gigabyte file into Civil 3D knows that more data is not always better. And you also get possible erroneous matches. If you jack your overlap up too high, the way that the image matching algorithm works, it takes 2 photos that are just right next to each other, finds a matched point that, because of the angle differences in photogrammetry, is actually slightly off from where it should be. You actually can introduce more vertical noise into your 3D model by increasing the overlap. So increasing the overlap actually does reduce accuracy sometimes. So yeah, like I was saying, your solutions are typically fly higher, lawnmower, not crosshatch, and no overlap overkill. Yeah, 90-90 overlap, not a bad idea. 75-70, I'll go back here just to hammer this in one more time. These are our recommendations. Yep, you can absolutely do more if you want, but this in all of our experience is going to be the most efficient kind of flight planning best practices. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the different flight patterns, and especially ground control points as well. If you look at this photo kind of on the left right here, you've got all of these red dots are going to be your individual photos, and the blue ones are going to be your ground control points. Do you guys see what the problem is with this one now yet? Well, a couple of things. One, it's crosshatched, more data than they need. This one, if we actually got this and someone asked us to process it, we would take half of these photos and just throw them out. Totally throw them out. It would take more processing time and do nothing with it. But the other thing is the ground control point distribution. They've got those 5 there, so it actually would be fine if only this kind of middle right sector is what they were surveying. But they actually wanted this whole area surveyed, and we said, no, if you're going to go out there, you're just going to get a lot more air out to the side here. It's not going to work. So that actually didn't, we got good accuracy on that middle part, which is where he really cared about, but the rest, he had to send a crew back out in the field to just hand topo. So going back into this photo on the right too, this is another example of just way too much data, people that aren't entirely sure what they're doing, so hey, why not take more photos? That can't hurt, right? Yeah, it can. They took a whole bunch of photos, they didn't really have enough ground control points, the overlap was all weird at different points, there were different flight altitudes, it was just kind of a disaster, and it really didn't wind up being what they wanted. It is a common instinct of like, hey, if it doesn't work the first time, just throw more data, throw more manpower, throw more time and effort and money at it, and that doesn't really work in the data processing side of things. Here's another flight example to show some multiple flights with insufficient overlap. If you look in the top right-hand corner there, there's not a ton of overlap here between this whole section and that whole section. Those 3 ground control points, that's not typically going to be enough. With ground control points, your best practices are 5 points per 300 photos or so, but really a minimum of 5 points per project to actually get it all right. So that whole section with only 3 ground control points, that's actually going to be pretty inaccurate. And I see another problem on this project as well. If you look in the left-hand side here, see this point? It's outside of the flight path. When you're actually planning a mission, you want your flight pattern to be just a little bit outside of the photos. It's kind of how photogrammetry works, right? You take photos from a whole bunch of different angles, and they're kind of from the outside looking in, and they triangulate to a point in the center. But if it's on the outside and everything's kind of looking out to the outside, then you're not going to be able to triangulate that point really well. Your ground control point will have a little bit of error in it. And this is one of those many just like compounding things that adds to error. And what makes the difference between a pretty picture and then an actual survey-grade drone flight. Here's another example of just insufficient overlap and what we would call, suboptimal mission planning. Whole bunch of different flights, but all of those areas circled in green, there's just not enough overlap there for it to even be stitched together in a single project. It's close, but it's not quite there. Ground control points, also horribly insufficient the way they are laid out. Each one of these areas basically can kind of rotate and wiggle around the ground control points. One of the ways that I like to think about ground control points is that, and edge photogrammetry, is that the photogrammetry model is kind of a rubber sheet, and the ground control points just nail those down to their proper place. And you can think about that just like it being in real life. If you actually have your rubber sheet and you only put, nails along one side that hold the rest of it and just flap in the wind. If you put too much distance between your ground control points, then the middle can kind of fold around. If you think this red kind of blob, amorphous blob up here, is a rubber sheet, and you only nailed it down at those blue dots, it's going to be flying all over the place. The accuracy on this was terrible. And this was one of those projects we actually felt really bad. It was for someone we were trying to sell as a new client, and they said, "Oh, we just bought this totally kick-ass, like $50,000 drone. This thing's awesome." And we're like, "Great, send us the data. We'll see what we can do with it. We'll process it. We'll see if we can get you a good survey out of it." And they sent us this, and we said, "Sorry, no, not doing it." We're like, "No, this was a $50,000 drone. You're telling me the data's crap?" Yeah, absolutely we are. Because your mission planning is terrible, your ground control point's terrible. We can't get you, we're not going to just give you a pretty picture and say, "Hey, this is a survey, good luck." Like, no, this is terrible. And it just goes to show that, that operations side, that mission planning is really important. So making sure that you have that 75-75 overlap, that you have enough ground control points kind of on the outer edges looking in, that's going to be really important in getting your survey grade data.
How do they get permitting to fly over a populated area?
Great question, they did. So the question was about FAA Part 107 permitting to fly over a populated area. To be fully honest on that, I'm not going to go too in-depth in it. The FAA laws are interesting, that they're fairly strict and totally not enforced as well. The FAA did recently come out with some new rules for allowing for flights over people that are going to go live later this year. So that is going to get easier over as time goes on to actually fly legally over people with the right operations procedures and that sort of thing. But realistically, what our recommendation is when it comes to that sort of thing is be a responsible person. If you're flying over a shopping mall, for example, go when the mall's closed, and maybe you might fly over one or two people, and strictly speaking, yeah, it might be breaking the law, but as long as you're responsible, the FAA doesn't really care. What they really care about are egregious violations of the law. And that's flying near airports, flying over a crowded concert venue or something. Yeah, absolutely not, don't do those. But being a good, responsible pilot, making sure your aircraft is well maintained, not taking unnecessary risks is probably fine. Next thing that I wanted to talk about, high relief projects. Areas that actually have significant amounts of elevation change. So what we see up here looking at this was a project on the top of a hill. As you can kind of see, so we're looking from the side here, this is a point cloud view. We've got, it was taken in two flight paths, one on the right, one on the left. All the green dots on the bottom are the ground. The kind of green and blue arrows are going to be ground control points. Now, the way that this actually works out in practice is you're going to get way better accuracy up here and considerably lower accuracy down here on the left-hand side. So why does that happen? We flew at a single fixed altitude, I don't know what it was, maybe 100 feet above ground, and then the hill dropped down by a couple hundred feet. So what was 100 feet in altitude up here on the right-hand side is now 300 feet in altitude on the left-hand side. But there's another implication beyond that as well. So not only are you going to get slightly lower resolution down here on the left-hand side, higher resolution on top, but you're also going to wind up having way more overlap on the left. So what was set up properly for 75-75 on the right actually winds up being closer to 90-90 on the left, because as it drops down, there are more photos spaced closer together, and you actually do even see in here, you see there's a lot more noise? Some of that's caused by vegetation, but a lot of that noise just in the photo on the left here is caused by erroneous matches, because that overlap winds up being so high on that, that side that it can create some of those erroneous matches that causes a little bit of error. Now, this might not be a bad thing, depending on the project that you're working on. For this one, if this was, a home construction site, they really want to have that super tight 1/10 of a foot accuracy on the right-hand side, and on the left, rough topo, 1 foot topo is going to be fine. So they can put up with a little bit of extra noise there on the right-hand side. So there are a couple of ways you can deal with this stuff when you're mission planning, and it really depends on which aircraft you're using, which software, which autopilot software you're using, because not all autopilots have the same features. The first one is something called terrain tracking. Terrain tracking is a pretty advanced feature that some of the more high-end autopilots have. That basically means as it goes down a slope, the drone will actually follow the slope as well. That's really nice because it keeps overlap totally consistent throughout the entire project. Some of the downsides of that are it's considerably more complicated, it doesn't always work, and also it needs to have a model of the Earth to follow. So with a lot of those terrain tracking autopilots, they actually use what's called SRTM. It's a 2003 model of the Earth. So it's older and therefore doesn't work on any sort of active grading site. Especially if you're doing any sort of mining, open pit quarries, something like that, where your topography is going to have changed very significantly since 2003. You can't really use a terrain tracking autopilot. The other way to do it is to fly it in tiers. So basically just when you create your flight patterns, you create 2 flight patterns, kind of like they did up here. Create one from the left-hand side and go up 150 feet from there, and you fly that. And then you take off again from down here, only go up at 250, or 150, 200 feet again, and fly that whole area at approximately the same site. So you kind of have so that you're always approximately that kind of 150, 200 feet above ground, something like that. That's a good way to manage areas with a lot of kind of relief. So, sorry.
You get a fuzzy spot in the middle where you got this flight and that flight where you meld them together.
Can you meld them together when you have those different?
Yeah, I mean, which one do you have now?
Yeah, when you do have, Yep, so when you do have different elevation flights and there is a part where they overlap, that is totally possible in the post-processing and the photogrammetry step to still actually stitch those together and have a consistent, good project, even though there's, and still have accuracy in the middle. They need to have overlap. They need to have a portion of the project that's in both flight plans for it to work. You can process it together. It depends on how much you want to put into a single processing bucket. So the next thing I want to dive into a little bit more detail about, we've already talked a good amount about this, is setting ground control points and checkpoints. So the value of ground control points and checkpoints are pretty obvious to people that have actually started working on it, but I also want to start by clarifying exactly what we mean when we say ground control points, and also what we mean when we say checkpoints, because they are very, very different, even though in the field they look exactly the same. A ground control point is something that is used in the processing of the project to actually anchor the project to a known point on the ground. And it means it needs to be marked so that it can be seen from all of the photos, and then it is an integral part of the process to actually make it have that accuracy tied into the project itself. A checkpoint, on the other hand, the same thing. You shoot it on the ground. It's just XYZ coordinate. But it is very explicitly not used in the processing of the project. In fact, for it to be a checkpoint, it must not be used in the processing of the project. And that is the only way to actually verify accuracy, because you want it to be independent. You want it to not be involved in the model of the project. A big mistake that a lot of people make, and I kind of blame Pix4D for this, no offense, is that they'll give you an accuracy of your ground control points on their quality report. If you've ever done photogrammetry, and say, hey, you put in 3 ground control points and you have an accuracy of 3/1000ths of a foot, good for you. But that's not real accuracy. To get real accuracy, you need to know what the accuracy is for something that wasn't used to calculate the model. And that's what setting independent checkpoints is. And that is the way to actually validate accuracy and to make sure that when you're doing a drone survey, that it's actually accurate. Set points, if you're having someone else process the data too, hold those points back. Don't even give them to the person that's processing it, and then check after the fact to make sure that your data is accurate. If anyone's worked with traditional aerial photogrammetrists, it's probably done in I know it's done in exactly the same way. You hold back points, they send you a surface, you throw it into CAD, you check these points, you check your held back points against the surface that they did, and if it checks out within whatever your tolerance is, maybe a 10th, maybe 5/10, whatever, then great, you're good to go. If you hold back that point and it's off by 10 feet, then you know you've got a problem. But you need to treat ground control points and checkpoints differently. So here's a bit more. We were talking about altitude, project planning, that sort of thing. So this is just a really rough table. This uses, this assumes a DJI Phantom 4 Pro, 20 megapixel camera, standard flight batteries, blah, blah, blah. This table will be totally different for every single drone camera sensor combination that you use, but because the Phantom 4 is the most common one, that's what we put up on the chart. So you can see some of the approximate horizontal, vertical, tested RMSEs that we've done. RMSE means root mean squared error. I've mentioned this before. If you really want to learn more about it, you can look up just Google what's called the ASPRS Positional Accuracy Standards. It's this 35-page, extraordinarily detailed, academic-style paper of what the heck you actually mean when you're testing accuracy. You probably don't need it, but if you want something to put you to sleep at night, it might help. So, 100 feet, you can cover about 5 acres per battery. And you're going to get your 1/10 vertical and better than 1/10 horizontal. Realistically, we've actually gotten slightly better than all of these accuracies as well, but we like to be a little bit conservative in what we put on the table just because there are always additional sources there that can be planned for.
I can get you the microphone so
Yes,
everybody can hear you. I'm just not fast enough.
Question I have is a comment is just both of these two, because we work with the publishing ASPRS standards. So if people, surveyors, you want to report accuracy, that's how it needs to be listed as, reported to, I'm sure you're aware. But the other part is, I think it's merit to mention the fact of vegetative versus non-vegetative surfaces when you talk about different.
Yep. That's absolutely correct. So vegetated and non-vegetated surfaces do have an accuracy difference according to positional accuracy standards. These are for non-vegetated surfaces. So these are going to be for hardscape, dirt, or technically very low grass cover or something that's mowed grass. For actual grass, it's going to use a 95% confidence interval as a measure of accuracy as opposed to a root mean squared error. Again, if you really want the details, I actually do encourage you to read through the ASPRS positional accuracy standards. It's all kinds of million caveats that really matter when you are reporting accuracy. The other thing that matters here is what we were talking about, the number of ground control points that you have to set. If you're flying at 100 feet with a Phantom 4 Pro at 75/75, if you're flying at 100 feet, you need to set 5 targets, 5 ground control points per 5 acres. If you're flying at 400 feet, you need to set 5 targets per 50 acres. That's a big difference when it comes to field time. It's a huge difference. And that's why I was saying, if you fly 50 acres at 100 feet, then you need to set 50 targets. And that's a pain. It's a huge pain in order to get that level of accuracy that we were talking about before. If you don't set enough targets, you're just not going to get that accuracy. And everything in between those targets is just not going to be accurate enough. So this is where that big trade-off between altitude and accuracy comes into play again. Lower is only better if you want to spend more time in the field, more time processing, and you absolutely need that temp accuracy. If you are flying for topo only, if you are flying for an ortho photo only, that you just want an accurate ortho photo to have a record of the site and to back up your drawing when you deliver it to your client, don't fly at 100 feet. You're making your life a lot harder on yourself. We've typically found this kind of 200 foot to be a real Goldilocks zone for the majority of projects. 200 feet is going to be really, really good, plenty good when you're doing, as I was saying, those paint stripes on a parking lot. If you need 500,000 parking stalls and you need every paint stripe shot, fly it at 200 feet. That's going to be plenty good. And your ADA ramps, those on the ground still. It's part of the mixed workflow. That's how you're going to save the most amount of time, get the most amount of value out of it. Your 100 feet is when you need really, really high accuracies, and your 400 feet is when you need huge amounts of area covered and topo.
If you increase the number of,
Yeah, I can get the microphone to you. You raise your hand? Okay.
if you increase the amount of ground control points at 400 feet, does your accuracy decrease?
Nope. The question was, if you increase ground control points, does your accuracy get better? And the answer is no. There's a point of diminishing returns. And this is right around that kind of butter zone where from 3 ground control points to 5 ground control points will make a difference. From 5 to 10 will make basically no difference whatsoever. And from 10 to 100, absolutely no difference, no matter what you do. The error there comes from not ground control point, but from all of the other sources of noise. Just the fact that a 20 megapixel camera at 400 feet only has a certain resolution or ground sampling distance, that there are vibrations involved, that the camera is going to be imperfect, GPS is going to be imperfect. Heck, even everything you measure on the ground, there's a certain level of inaccuracy there. Your pole was just, barely off by a tiny little angle, so that's off by a 10. It happens. There's noise and all of this stuff. So no, you don't get better accuracy just by throwing ground control points out there. This is really about as good as drones can do. And again, this is with the Phantom 4 Pro. There are other systems out there that I'm sure some of you guys are aware of too. GCP best practices. I'll kind of breeze through this because we already talked about this. 5 targets per battery is a great rule of thumb, which winds up being 5 targets about per 300 or 400 photos or so. In general, for a nice ideal square or rectangle project like this, 4 in the corner, 1 in the middle, but the general rules still apply even for odd-shaped projects. You want some on the outer edges and some in the middle. You want to fly at least one flight line beyond the edge of the project. If you look out here, the photos do actually go out beyond the edges of the roads, where you can kind of see where the area of interest. An obvious center point helps, and visible from multiple angles. That's good practices for actually setting your ground control points. For setting checkpoints, which we already talked about, those matter actually a little bit less. You kind of want those to be randomly distributed. If you really want to test to see what your accuracy is, put some checkpoints in the areas that are kind of in the middle, far away from as many ground control points as possible. For linear mission planning, for people that actually fly, roadways and pipeline corridors and things like that, you still need checkpoints, but you still need ground control points, but the rules are a little bit different. What we found works really well for linear mission planning is setting pairs of ground control points, one on either side of the road or corridor, and approximately every 500 feet or so of linear distance. We recommend pairs because if you put only single points, especially single ground control points, down the center of the road, if we go back to that kind of rubber sheet metaphor, you kind of wind up having it walking on a tightrope almost, that the other edges of the road can twist up and down, and it introduces a heck of a lot of error, especially in vertical. So a single ground control point, even if you kind of zigzag them back and forth on a corridor mission, single ground control points we generally don't recommend them. Pairs are going to be a heck of a lot better for mission linear.
I can get that microphone to you.
So when you talk about 500 feet apart on the linear, that would be again at your 400 foot level for the
500 feet is typically for 200-foot altitude. You can go a little bit longer than that, 750 to 1,000 if you fly at 400 feet, and you want to go a little bit tighter than that if you fly much lower, at maybe 100 feet or so.
Great, thanks.
Yep. Question over there?
We got 2 microphones now, so we can cover a little bit more ground.
No, it's working. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. To convert coordinate systems? Great. Yeah. So the question was about coordinate systems. DJI systems all give everything in lat long, and you guys don't work in lat long. You get it. So what do you use to convert it? Pix4D, if you're using photogrammetry, is a great tool, but the short answer is we recommend not using conversions at all, and actually totally throwing out, at the end of the day, totally throwing out the lat long stuff that DJI drones put out. And what you use for accuracy is your ground control points. And your ground control points are in whatever coordinate system you're already using. That means if you're in NAT 83, then it's in NAT 83, because that's what your ground control points are in. If you're using a totally local coordinate system because you set up over a point and said this is 5,000, 5,000, and everything's relative to there, then ta-da, if you use ground control points, you're already in the exact same local coordinate system. There's no need for conversions if you just ignore all of the WGS84, all of the lat long stuff that was on the photo stamps beforehand, and you use your ground control points instead. So that's typically what we do, because coordinate systems, I mean, heck, you guys, coordinate systems are a source of enormous amounts of headaches if you don't do the conversions right. So the best way is to not actually do the conversions. Use your ground control points. You're doing surveying on the ground, no matter what. Like I said, you need your high accuracy shots, your boundary shots are going to be done on the ground, some of the ALTA stuff has to be done on the ground. So use your ground shots, integrate it in, and then you're all set. It really doesn't matter. It does wind up, technically, I'll put in a caveat because someone might call me out on it. It does matter if you start getting to enormous projects that are where the curvature of the earth starts to take impact, but you're talking thousands of acres at that point. Yes, at that point you need to start doing proper conversions in the photogrammetry process, and you can't just totally throw out the data. But for the vast, vast, vast majority of projects, even up to 1,000 acres, you can just use the ground control point data, and you don't have to use the GPS data off of the drone.
You're probably going to get to it, but is there a reason that you're flying that at an angle to the roads?
Actually, no particular reason there. The angle, like north or south, east or west, or at an angle, is more about field practicality than anything else. My guess is that was flown for, I wasn't pilot on this mission, so my guess is that was flown for wind purposes, so that it was actually flown sideways to the wind, as opposed to any sort of, it really matters north, south, east, west. The angle of the flight pattern doesn't really matter that much from an accuracy perspective. So whatever makes sense from a mission planning perspective, whatever you can do to minimize the actual flight time, that's what we would recommend, but the accuracy doesn't take a hit from having it twisted at an angle. More on ground control, this is another example of insufficient ground control distribution, another just wonky flight pattern as well that they kind of did this goofy crosshatch. It's not quite north and south. But we've got those 4 ground control points all along the bottom road, and then 2, 3 kind of at the top. They're kind of on the outside edge, so they're not going to be that great as well. There's nothing in the center, so there's going to be a lot of wiggle room in the center. The fact is that kind of southern road is probably going to be okay-ish in accuracy, but the center of this project is probably going to see that kind of maybe half a foot error, maybe even a little bit more. A couple more other things. Oh yeah, we're talking about insufficient overflight of GCPs at the edges. This photo on the right here just kind of demonstrates what it looks like when you have a photo that's, you can't really fly that much far below freezing. But the biggest thing for you guys is just going to be snow on the ground. Photogrammetry maps what it can see. If there's a couple feet of snow, it's going to map the top of that snow very accurately. But it will only map the top of the snow, which is not what you care about. Typically, other than that, when there's not snow falling, you actually can fly. If you are flying regularly in sub-freezing temperatures when it's 0 degrees or something like that. There are hardware options out there that are hardened to be able to fly in colder weather. But the biggest option is really, the obstacle is really just going to be snow on the ground. If there's snow on the ground, then it'll map the snow, not the ground. Moving on, creating and planning and saving your flight paths. We already walked through all that mission planning. Equipment packing checklist, that's my favorite because it's the one where I personally made the most stupid mistakes. Setting up your equipment, base station, inspecting an aircraft, surveying your ground data, your GCPs, checkpoints, obstructed areas, building corners, that sort of stuff. Checking your emergency procedures, making sure you have some basic plans for what to do if something happens. Loading a mission, typically single button, load a mission to the aircraft. Running an operation, single button, go, very hard. And then data handling procedures as well. Just having like standard procedures, what do you do with the data? You just flew, now you have this tiny little micro SD card that has a full day's worth of work on it that you really don't want to lose. Just making sure you have the right procedures in advance of what you're going to do with it, where you're going to make copies, how you're going to transmit it, get it to your data people, how you're going to process it, and that sort of thing, just so you don't lose all of that data. Once you're kind of up to speed, once you have a little bit of experience running an operation like this whole thing, this whole process, including the flight itself, takes 30, maybe 40 minutes or so.
I was going to also recommend too, we've got a good practice where we contact law enforcement before we fly.
Yep.
They actually really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that way too, it also, if people are concerned about seeing a drone flying,
Yep.
they're already aware and comfortable, and so I'd recommend that too.
Yeah, contacting law enforcement is a good idea, and really it depends on what type of site you're doing as well. So it is not legally required. One of the things that we do, that we recommend, strangely it's not a law, you can fly over anyone's property without their permission. Kind of weird that that's not a law. We don't recommend that. We recommend being a good neighbor and just getting permission of anyone's property that you are going to be flying over, and that anyone on the ground is aware of it. As surveyors, it's unbelievable how much latitude surveyors get if you just ask for permission for anything in advance. Go up to anyone in any park and be like, hey, I'm flying a drone over for a surveying, is that cool? Oh yeah, absolutely, like super interested. Same thing, contacting law enforcement. If you are in an area where someone might get upset, contacting law enforcement so they're aware is not a bad idea, but not legally mandatory at least.
Just wondering if you could circle back to weather and touch on wind.
Yeah, wind is a great question. So the issue with wind has nothing to do with accuracy, it's all about safety. Because of the way that most of these drones work with their gimbal cameras, even if the drone's kicking like crazy in the wind, the camera's going to be rock steady, so that's not an issue. Your accuracy is going to be good. The issue is with safety. Your DJI Phantom series is typically capable of up to about 18 miles an hour sustained winds. Some of your fixed wings are capable of a little bit more wind, but they'll actually have a little bit. It's all just a safety issue, and you want to operate within the specs of the aircraft that you're working with. Phantoms up to about 18 miles an hour. There are some other ones, but you're spending a lot of money oftentimes for weather-hardened aircraft that don't have any accuracy benefits. They just can fly in higher wind and higher and like more extreme temperatures as well. So that's our typical recommendation: fly within manufacturer's specifications for the wind tolerance of that individual aircraft. All right, so I'll walk through just one example real quick here of a project site. This was a real life project of ours. This is 145 acres with limitations of where we can tie in. Accuracy spec, there's actually a ton of relief here, as we'll see in a second. We need 1 foot contours, which means we needed better than half a foot vertical root mean squared error on the actual ASDRS certification. Flight altitude, we selected 400 feet. That's going to be enough because it's a big project site and we only need 1 foot contours. Flight time is going to be about 45 minutes all told. Take 3 batteries, and what that means is we'll need about 15 targets for that 145 acres. So we just kind of blast through that. Here's what it looks like in Google Earth. Did just a little bit of mission planning beforehand. Try and get some of these ground control targets as evenly spaced as we can within the limitations of the project site. So that was kind of our flight plan. This is what the actual mission flight plan looks like. That dot was going to be the takeoff zone. That red circle is a 1,500 foot radius, about as far as the eye can see, at least for a Phantom. So that's the 145 acre zone, and you can see just that single crosshatch flight pattern there. And this is what the end result looked like. This is that end survey data. So you've got your clean major and minor contours there, a whole bunch of break lines, lot lines, road lines, all sorts of other features. So to get there, we need the office workflow as well. Now, I'm running a little bit out of time, so I don't have that much detail to go to the office workflow, but part of the reason behind that is the office workflow is actually very, very hard to do. And as much as I wish that I were a good enough teacher that after 2 hours I could, get you all to sit and pass a certified photogrammetrist exam, I'm not quite that good. I'm getting there. So this is kind of our preferred workflow. There are a bunch of softwares that you can use at any one of these steps, but for photogrammetry, Pix4D is the market leader. That's one that we use that actually puts the photos into the 3D model. Aerotas Photoscan is another popular one. Nothing wrong with that, perfectly acceptable. Drafting line work, there's a software we use called Virtual Surveyor. There are a bunch of other things that you can use as well. There are point cloud processing softwares that are typically pretty cumbersome, but they'll actually work as well. Let's see, there's another one. Global Napper is another software out there that you can use to draft line work on. It's not too bad. And then obviously finishing in CAD, Civil 3D, Carlson, any CAD suite that you use is going to be perfectly fine. So you have options for photogrammetry though, that we were talking about. There are a couple of different things. There's automated services like 3DRs, site scan, and drone deploy is going to be the biggest one. And that's one of your simple cloud-based drag and drop, upload, and then they spit out a orthophoto and 3D model for you. They're fully automated. They're typically going to be the fastest and the cheapest of anyone, but they're also typically going to be the lowest accuracy. They don't have any human in the loop, so that if there are any errors, they typically won't be caught. And they don't have anyone looking to say like, oh, hey, your ground control point distribution is insufficient, or hey, there's a water feature that actually split the project into 2 blocks. So typically these are great if you're doing very, very low accuracy mapping, maybe you just need imagery, but they're almost never going to be up to a surveyor standard. The next option is an in-house photogrammetry suite. Pix4D, Database, or Aerotas Photoscan is another option there. That's where you actually bring it in, you run the photogrammetry in-house. It is the most flexible option out there, and it gives you the most control over everything. Downsides are, it is difficult and expensive. Photogrammetry has a pretty long learning curve, and you need to buy the software itself, which is a couple $1,000s, as well as all of the hardware to go with it. But it is actually really good for sensitive data, unusual projects. We have a lot of our clients that actually have some projects that touch military installations, DoD stuff, and they're just legally not allowed to give it to any other third-party provider, so that's why we do that. Got a question over there?
Yeah, I was wondering about Civil 3D at Autodesk now has the recap.
Yep.
Have you had experience with that in processing at all?
Yes. Are there any Civil 3D reps or AutoCAD reps in the room? Not up to snuff yet. It's a very early stage product still, and while they technically work, things like Pix4D and Aerotas Photoscan are just so much more developed, so much more advanced, and much, much, much more capable. There are a lot of new photogrammetry softwares out there. I only mentioned a few. There are dozens now, absolutely just dozens of them. And some of them are good at some things, but yeah, the workflow is a little clunky, the accuracy is a little clunky, the measuring it, the making your manipulations are a little clunky. Pix4D and Aerotas are both market leaders for those softwares, and that's what we would recommend. So they work, but again, typically they're actually not going to get survey grade accuracy as we see it, at least not yet. A lot of these software, a lot of things in this is not yet. It's a rapidly developing industry, so I imagine that they'll get there, but realistically, I don't think they're there yet. And then the last thing, sorry for a little bit of a company plug here too, is having a specialized service do a lot of your photogrammetry service processing as well. That's what we do as a company. We do photogrammetry service and line work drafting and processing. You upload your photos, your ground control points, and that to us and our photogrammetrists. We have human-in-the-loop processing that actually look through all of this, tell you what your accuracy is, tell you if there are problems, as well as how to fix them. If you need to go out and shoot additional points, then we tell you where you need to shoot additional points. It is a slower turnaround time than any sort of automated service, but obviously it is best for high accuracy mapping, and you don't have to invest the tens of thousands of dollars in processing software and processing hardware, because we've already done that. Because honestly, photogrammetry is hard. It is a pretty difficult process to get it right every single time. There's camera calibration, all of your ground cover and lighting issues, there's ground control issues, coordinate systems. And what our job is, and what we view a lot of the job of photogrammetry is to spot errors. To make sure that you see errors before you deliver a survey. And that's how we can really provide value and help you to get the best accuracy data the first time. That said, if you want to be more involved in photogrammetry, we strongly encourage that. I've given a few plugs for ASPRS, the American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. They have certifications for photogrammetry, including a new one for unmanned aerial systems, a certified mapping scientist in UAS. We strongly recommend, if you are going out to bring photogrammetry in-house, that you get someone trained up and certified on photogrammetry for drones specifically. And these guys they're a really, really great nonprofit organization. I'm a member, I'm certified myself as well, and that's what we recommend for actually getting trained up beyond what I just kind of covered today. We've talked a lot about verifying accuracy too. ASPRS Positional Accuracy Standard, published in 2014. These really are just the gold standard for measuring accuracy with aerial surveys. One of my favorite parts about them is that they're sensor agnostic. It doesn't matter if you have a $1 million metric camera or a GoPro wrapped to a drone with duct tape or a LiDAR sensor. They can actually help you measure accuracy with any project. Because, heck, if you want to use a toy-grade drone, you actually could. And you can measure your accuracy. You might only get accuracy down to a foot, but who knows, for some projects that might be good enough. The only downside to these is that they do not specify best practices. They tell you how to measure accuracy, but if your measured accuracy is terrible, they don't tell you how to fix it, because that depends on every workflow is going to be unique there. So after photogrammetry, the photogrammetry stuff, Pixport is that market-leading software. The next step is actually reducing it from that full rich photogrammetry model, which is going to be your multi-gigabyte point cloud, your orthophoto, your digital surface model, and reducing it into a clean surface, extracting all of that data. I already talked about that. Our recommendation is a software called Virtual Surveyor. It's a really powerful software that you can use. It is designed to take these huge files and draft individual points off of them. Because, as I mentioned before, if you've ever tried to import a full resolution point cloud into AutoCAD, importing a full resolution point cloud into AutoCAD often doesn't work. And one of the things that I've seen people try and do before is a process that we call dumb decimation. They just say, all right, well, this point cloud's too big and it doesn't work, so let's just cut it down by 90%. We'll only take 1 out of every 10 points. Well, you just gave up a huge amount of your data fidelity. All of your curve lines that were going to be sharp curve lines now look like junk because you got rid of 90% of the points. And you only did that because you wanted to get a point cloud into Civil 3D, so you're giving up all of this huge level of accuracy to make it work in existing software. Don't do that. You want to have an intermediate step that's actually drafting, getting you to a surface and your 2D features. This is typically going to be a fairly manual process right now. There are advancements every year made in machine learning algorithms and on artificial intelligence, and push a button and ta-da, it extracts all the right feature points. They're getting better. They've still got a ways to go. We use some of those features internally to kind of accelerate the process, but typically they still like drawing contour lines around cows and cars and that sort of thing, which aren't very useful to us. And then the last step is actually going to be finishing in CAD. So you get all of that. The output of this last stage is going to be typically either a DXF or a DWG file. A lot more lightweight. You've got your topo points, you've got your break lines, you've got your curve lines. This is actually a live project here too. You see we've got 4 curve lines on every single curve, which is what you want to see for your highest level of accuracy. All of your various score lines, there's some contours in here as well, and your topo points, edge of pavement, edge of sidewalk, blah, blah, blah. And then you import that into CAD, where you actually apply all of your existing layering standards. You apply your seal. You also in CAD is where you're going to integrate all of your extra ground data as well. That's where you get all of your just kind of color that you add to the survey, street names, utility panels, anything that you pulled off of the deeds and right-of-ways and that sort of stuff. So the idea is that a finished drone survey is totally, absolutely, completely indistinguishable from a field survey. We talked about, I had this slide up at the beginning. This is the end goal. This is a survey. Nowhere on here does it say, hey, this was actually shot with a drone, so look how fancy it is. No, it's a survey. The client paid for a survey of this site and said, hi, I would like a survey of this site. They didn't say, I want you to use a drone as a tool. They said, I want a survey. That's what they care about. And the client came in, and the client was able to, or our client, was able to underbid all their competitors by a couple $100 and still have a bigger profit margin because they used the drone to take about 90% of the data and then work it in and finish it up in CAD. So to us, that's what the whole workflow looks like and should look like when you're actually getting it. It's all about saving time and money. It's about getting to this. It's about getting to that final deliverable in the way that is fastest, cheapest, and easiest, and getting accurate data that you can count on that your client will have no idea that you even surveyed it with a drone. That's the most successful survey. So with that, that finishes up everything that I've got here, but I'm happy to open it up for questions for a little bit. I know we're not too far away from lunch right now. So, yeah, and also I should point out, if you want the presentation, come and drop us a card. My colleague Trey is in the back there as well that has contact information, and we've got a booth out on the floor if you want to come and talk to us at any point today or tomorrow. So yeah, thank you, and I'll open it up for questions.
So circling back to where you talked about throwing out the GPS data when you're going into post-processing, is that something you're actually doing, say, so I work in FixedWing also.
Yep.
Are you actually, when you're going to import the images, throwing out the lat long from those images, or are you still using that data?
Sometimes it depends on what the coordinate system is. If the ground control points are in something like NAT83 that it's close enough, we'll use it for an initial geo-referencing first and actually keep it in there. If it's a fully local or arbitrary coordinate system, then we'll throw it out. Yep.
And then I have one other one. What's your recommended autopilot software right now?
Recommended autopilot software, if you're using a Phantom 4 Pro, there is a software called Map Pilot by a company called Maps Made Easy. That's probably best in breed for that sort of thing. But it really depends on the hardware that you're using too. The new Phantom 4 RTK does not allow for third-party autopilots, so you're a little bit limited there. Same thing if you're using a fixed wing like a SenseFly EV, then you have to use what's called eMotion software. And they're all fine, but it depends on your hardware. But Map Pilot's our favorite for the Phantom series at least. Yeah, no problem. Anything else?
Are there any methods you've got that will help reduce the file size when you're using the large photos? What we have a difficulty with, we can export them, we can, but when we issue a delivery like we showed on the screen, even in the PDF, the file size is just enormous.
Yep, you're absolutely correct. Managing file sizes is a pain. So I'll actually take this to put in another plug-in for what we do. Yeah, we actually do create multiple versions of each ortho photo when we're done. We create CAD-friendly versions and then full resolution versions. Because quite honestly, there's no real way to get a full resolution version of a photo into CAD. It's just not going to happen. People will try. You can try tiling it. You can tile it until your eyes bleed, and it's still going to cause all kinds of problems. So creating multiple correctly geo-referenced ortho photos in the processing phase is the best way to do that. So you have your full resolution one that you use for drafting, and then you have a CAD-friendly version that is, there are a couple specific compression algorithms, as well as downsampling algorithms that we use to create CAD-optimized photos that you can use for this. That will then import, they're only like 100 megabytes or something. They import into CAD perfectly fine, or more than enough for printing. And that's one of the many services that we provide too on the data processing side of things. So, but yeah, full resolution photos in CAD, nightmare. Don't even try it as our recommendation. You can, but it's hard. Yes?
Two quick questions. What do you use or recommend as a display for like a tablet or a fixed display as part of your controller? And then do you always use a 2 or 3 person crew and a visual observer?
Great question. So, first question, what tablet do we use? Again, it's hardware specific. But for the Phantom 4 series, iPad all day. Not that I'm some iOS boy that loves all the Apple things and doesn't like Android. Android's fine. Apple is just more reliable. I hate to say it, fewer errors, it just works more often than Android, which seems to have a few more glitches. Phantom 4 RTK has a built-in system, so that one, it's actually really great. It's integrated into the controller, so there's no separate battery to charge, and it's a ridiculously bright screen, so it still works out in the field. Biggest downside with the iPad is that on a bright sunny day, it's kind of hard to actually see it, and on a cold day, you're wearing fingers, or you're wearing gloves that make it hard. So there's some other little things that we like having. All of our drone kits, we keep those little styluses in them too, so that you can actually use an iPad and touch screens while wearing gloves when it's cold outside. And sometimes just like a little hood on the iPad as well, just when it's bright and sunny outside, so that you can see it a little better. And I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Do you use a visual observer?
Visual observer in addition to the pilot. Sometimes, not always, which is exactly what the law is written as well. For larger project sites, if we were flying maybe 150 acres, I'd probably recommend having a visual observer, just someone to help you spot for it. If it's a busy site, if you're ever crossing a roadway, having a visual observer watch for any sort of traffic so that you can avoid the traffic and not fly over cars or something like that is a good way to help. But for a lot of smaller sites and a lot of smaller crews, people send out a single guy with a drone and his Basin rover, and that's all there is to it. All right. So it looks like that's about all we have. If I did miss any questions, please come up. I'll be here for a while, and I'll be at the booth for the whole